Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today for the latest installment of the Evolution of Mindfulness speaker series. So my name is Frances Sadi, and I serve as the Associate Director of Non-Degree Programs here at Brown University's School of Professional Studies. So I know this is a full and often hectic time of year, so I really do want to just start and acknowledge and simply say thank you for making space in your day to be here live in real time. We don't take that for granted. So whether mindfulness is central to your work or something that you're just beginning to explore, we're really glad that you're here, and your presence really does help shape this space. And as you can see from the chat, you're part of a global community engaging with these practices in thoughtful and meaningful ways. So a bit about the series. The Evolution of Mindfulness speaker series was created to explore how the engagement with and practice of mindfulness continues to grow and adapt over time. How practices rooted in contemplative wisdom are being integrated into a wide range of sectors, from education and mental health to corporate leadership and public service, shaped by the scientific research and reimagined in response to the social, cultural, and ethical challenges of our time. So here at the School of Professional Studies, our mission is to empower adult learners and professionals, people such as you, with the tools, skills, and networks that you need to make meaningful change in the world. We believe in helping our learners not just succeed in their own careers, but change the way the world works for good. Our mindfulness offerings, developed in close partnership with the Mindfulness Center at Brown University's School of Public Health, reflects that mission. Together, we aim to deliver high-quality, research-informed mindfulness programming that supports individual well-being, professional development, and also the broader movement towards collective care. Over the past year, we've had the honor to host a number of leaders in the field, from clinicians and contemplatives to neuroscientists and innovators working in the front lines of emerging mindfulness research. So if you haven't already, we definitely encourage you to check out our past talks. We have a YouTube playlist later on in the session. I can drop the link to that as well. Today's session, titled Staying Present for When It Matters Most, Mindfulness, Attention, and Human Resilience, is a timely and meaningful conversation that lives at the intersection of science, practice, and real-world application. Our guest today, Dr. Amishi Jha, is a neuroscientist and professor of psychology at the University of Miami, whose research focuses on the brain's attention system and the impact of mindfulness training on resilience and performance, particularly in high-stress, high-demand environments such as the military, emergency services, and healthcare. Her work has been supported by the U.S. Department of Defense and also featured by TED, NATO, the World Economic Forum, the New York Times, and NPR. She is the author of the national bestseller Peak Mind and the creator of the soon-to-be-released app Push-Ups for the Mind. It will be launched next month and available in app stores worldwide. Much of Amishi's research has been shaped by close collaborations with high-performance professions, such as military service members and firefighters, to medical teams and first responders. In fact, she led the first large-scale study of mindfulness training with active duty service members, exploring how mindfulness can strengthen focus, regulate the nervous system, and also help people show up with greater clarity and presence in the moments that matter most. At the core of her work is a commitment to bridging rigorous neuroscience and real-world impact, making mindfulness both measurable and meaningful. So today's conversation will widen the lens to explore how attention more broadly, today's conversation is going to widen the lens to explore attention more broadly. We'll look at how attention focuses over time, why it falters when we need it most, and what it means to train attention with intention. For those of you grounded in programs like MBSR, this talk may actually might challenge and stretch your understanding of how mindfulness looks when adopted for populations who aren't necessarily seeking stress relief or who may only engage with the practice in shorter, more targeted ways. And so for those of you who are newer to mindfulness or drawn to mindfulness kind of for its more performance enhancing potential, Amishi's research offers accessible evidence-based entry points grounded in attention science and practical strategies. So hopefully you can bring your curiosity, and rather seeing these approaches in opposition, we invite you today to explore the affinities, the shared intentions underneath the different delivery modes, and the ways in which mindfulness, however introduced, can support greater clarity, compassion, and resilience. So together we'll explore questions like, how does attention really work? Why does it fail us when we need it most? And what can mindfulness do to support resilience over time? And also, how can we design programs that meet people where they are while still honoring the heart of the practice? So joining Amishi in the conversation today is Dr. Eric Laux, director of the Mindfulness Center at Brown and a professor of epidemiology, behavior and social sciences and medicine. Eric will guide, as he has done in the past, Eric will guide the conversation for the next hour, half an hour. And then we will, for the next half an hour or so, and we'll also then open it up for a Q&A as we normally do. We'll be drawing from questions that many of you have submitted in advance, as well as questions submitted from you live today. So as the talk is going on, if something sparks your curiosity, we invite you to drop your questions into the Q&A feature found at the bottom of your Zoom link. And then if you can reserve, try to not put your questions into the chat, use the Q&A feature. And then as you're doing now, please use the chat to engage with the talk itself. It's one way to bring your voice to this conversation. Just a quick note, today's session is being recorded, so please look for an email from us in the next day or two with a link to our YouTube playlist. And that's it on my end. It's my pleasure to hand things over to Eric Laux and Amishi Jha. Eric and Amishi, thank you so much for being here with us today, and thank you to everyone online who made time to be a part of this conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Fran. Thank you, Amishi, for being here. I think we've known each other for maybe a decade or so, and I've really appreciated the work that you've done. I often think of, with faculty members, we're often paid and expected to go really deep into one area with our research and education. And then I think we're also expected in many ways by society to communicate back what we've found in a way that is really accessible and supportive to the benefit of society. And I feel like you've done a very skillful job at both of those, going deep into a particular area, such as attention, for example, and how to foster it, including using mindfulness practices, but then also how to communicate it back out, such as through your book, your upcoming app, and all the work that you do with people that are really working in high consequence situations. So thank you for joining us today, and I look forward to supporting our conversation that'll have ripple effects to the audience and beyond.
I'm excited, Eric.
Yeah, good. I think with this speaker series, we often try to start and end with the same question to promote some fluidity. And so, if you're up for it, be curious to hear what first led you to mindfulness.
Yeah, there's it's a dual path of a journey. The one path, I can just say very succinctly, is need. Meaning, I was at a point in my life my son is now 23, so over 20 years ago. As a new mom, new faculty member, I just started my job at the University of Pennsylvania at that point. My husband was in grad school. We bought this 100-year-old fixer-upper. It was like the perfect storm of demand. And at some point, I realized I was at home in the evening. It was bedtime for my son, and it was my commitment that no matter how busy I was, no matter what I was doing at night, it was our time together, and I was going to fully be there and enjoy just reading a book with him. One night, I found myself just unable to be there. Like, I was physically there. I was staring at the page and completely checked out. And it was pretty clear from just the interaction with him that he was also aware that I wasn't there. And that was like a huge wake-up call for me. How could I possibly be a good parent? Something was just the most important thing to me if I couldn't even be there for the moments that I really wanted to be there. So I knew something had to change. I actually would say I didn't know it was mindfulness. What I knew was that my attention was completely off track and I needed to solve that problem. In my day job as a professor who studied attention, it was kind of interesting because at the same time this was happening to me, sort of my personal journey that did end up leading me to practice mindfulness. In the lab, we were pursuing almost a parallel track. funny how these things happen. During my graduate school years and my postdoc years, attention was a big part of what we studied. We knew that this was a very, very powerful brain system. I'd done studies with, brainwave recordings, functional MRI, and we knew a lot about how it works. That kind of got me worried when I started my own lab. I'm like, if something is extremely powerful, sometimes I'll refer to attention as the brain's boss. Something is so powerful. Well, what makes it crumble? What makes it fail? And we were pursuing a series of studies in which we were trying to answer that question by doing things like bringing undergraduates into the lab. And you can imagine, and Brown's probably not that different. You bring undergraduates into the lab, you have them do something, an attention task in this case. That's difficult to do. They have to pay attention, obviously, to do it. And then we'd mess with them in some way. And I say mess with, meaning in ethically approved, authorized ways. We would do things like tell them to sit in front of the computer screen, do this task, and then every so often say, you're just not going fast enough. Go faster, go faster. And they would stress them out. And that was sort of the intention, is what happens when you put this pressure on. Or we would do things like ask them to bring in some of the saddest music that they have ever heard, and we'd play it while they were doing these tasks. We'd kind of double down and say, okay, now kind of recall some negative memories from your own life. So we'd really sort of juice them up with this negative mood, have them do these tasks. Or, and this is probably their least favorite, we would do something called, as you know, psychosocial threat. So we would say, you're performing worse than anybody that's ever performed this task in this experiment. And that really did it, where they were like, this is terrible. Now, I wasn't just doing this to be mean. I was doing this because I had a sense that there were certain kinds of pressures that were likely to derail attention. And to answer your question of, how I came to mindfulness, it's sort of like both of those lines of work converged on this understanding that there is a training path. I learned about it first personally, and it helped me a lot. And it was almost like an aha moment where I was like, oh, this thing that I've been practicing that's helping me now go from being a distracted, unavailable parent to a very present one, where nothing in my external demands had changed, but I felt more embodied and available to my life, in addition to obviously my interactions with my child. Maybe that's something we can actually apply in the lab to solve some of these challenges that we're seeing when people undergo stress or negative mood or threat. And that sort of launched this entire enterprise that actually led me to wanting to pivot into studying populations for whom stress, threat, negative mood, et cetera, these were not just sort of optional things that you might dip into or have as part of the ups and downs of life, but those circumstances would describe the context in which you have to do your best work. So, whether it's an emergency room physician or nurse or a frontline professional, we all rely on those individuals being able to be there, even when it's the toughest moments.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think you're pivot into those populations where there's immediate consequences if attention lapses. It was really skillful and also meaningful to support those populations in their day-to-day work. And I think, like, in some ways, when you think about attention, and often we want to be like locked in, like right into the present moment, focus on what we're doing. But then there can also be times when it's beneficial for the mind to wander. Like that's where ideas can come from and stuff. And so, what do you see as the costs and benefits of mind wandering
Yeah.
versus attention itself?
And maybe it's be helpful to define some of the terms, because we're now, we use that term colloquially to mean, oh, just let your mind kind of go, kind of like if you're going for, a nice walk and let the mind meander, if you will.
Yeah.
But the term mind wandering is actually a technical term in the field of cognitive neuroscience, and it refers to having off-task thoughts during an ongoing task. So and I want to just kind of contrast those two. So in one instance, when you are going for a walk, there's no real task you're doing when it comes to using your attention. You're just letting it roam, and it's a beautiful thing to do. Mind wandering, specifically in this kind of task-specific way, has to do with there is a demand. There is some place you should be putting your attention, and your attention is not there. It's gone somewhere else. And so what we know about that second way of, defining mind wandering, which is within this field, is that it's a bad news thing to do if you are required to pay attention, which you are usually to some kind of demanding task, and you're mind wandering. We know that your performance is going to suffer. We know that you're going to actually be much more variable in how quickly you can respond. And actually, you're going to be too fast, probably because you're going to make a mistake in anticipating it. And unfortunately, has a lot of other bad effects. Like you feel bad, your mood is negative. You actually engage in fewer caring behaviors, and and in many ways it frays relationships when people do this quite often. So mind wandering when there is a task at hand is not a good thing. On the other hand, this other part of letting your mind go where it will, as you said, it's such an important thing to be able to do. And we also know from the broader scientific literature, we wouldn't call it mind wandering, we'd call it sort of spontaneous thought, which is this sort of broader category. And this we might even call kind of constructive, sounds super technical, constructive internal reflection, aka daydreaming, letting the mind go. I always talk about it as like meandering is a good way to put it. When we do that, we know that mood improves. People are able to kind of vision what the future is going to look like with much more clarity and plan productively. And oftentimes, creative problem solving is much more effective. The problem with our kind of modern world is that obviously we have this issue of mind wandering, which we've had throughout history, and we're not new to mind wandering as human beings. But we're now in a position where, because of our dense, packed, media infused landscape, technology infused landscape, what used to be opportunities naturally for mental meandering, whether you're standing in line at the grocery store, or just waiting at a traffic light, or literally going for a walk, now gets consumed by a focus, which is not necessarily a productive one, but it fills that space. So all of those sort of free moments are now taken up by a new kind of task, which is tethered to this technology, for example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's almost like being on task when it's important to be on task, but then maybe if our task is to have constructive thoughts wandering, then allow it to do that. In those moments, say
Yeah,
when we're going for a walk in nature, and that's actually the job, is to allow the mind to wander at that point and see what it
yeah,
wants.
absolutely. And oftentimes people will say, well, just, scrolling for a little bit, it kind of feels good. It's like, oh, it's letting my mind kind of do whatever it wants. It may feel good, which I would challenge you to really look at how you feel after 20 minutes of doing that, or even 5 minutes of doing that.
Yeah.
But the other thing is that the key to that beneficial type of spontaneous thought is that you're broad and unconstrained in terms of how information processing is happening in the brain. And you let whatever emerges emerge. Now, when you're looking at a screen, whatever that content it is, whatever the content is, going to narrow information processing around and aligned with that content. And it ends up that, getting told the 10th product to buy, or the most terrible news stories across the world, they're going to constrain your mind in a very particular way. And it's going to have a whole other cascade of consequences tied to your mood as well. So, yeah, it may not be as innocuous to just get online and scroll a little bit. So maybe, yeah, go for a walk instead, or just sit there. Even if you're not practicing, just sit there, see what happens. And people seem highly intolerant of doing this. But I want to just, say it is an incredibly useful thing to do, for reasons that might not be obvious. Like you're letting you're letting the reins out, letting go of the control of your attention, and that's a good thing.
Yeah.
So like giving it a
It is.
rest.
Yeah, when we're thinking about like how to most effectively strengthen attention, I know you've developed, say, MBAT, like the Mindfulness-Based Attention Training Program, and looked at it in various different populations, whether it's athletes or first responders or military personnel. And curious, like, what have you learned about which program components are most effective to strengthen attention? So if someone really wanted to strengthen their attention, what are you finding are the most efficient and effective ways to do that?
Yeah, and just to kind of, I think it's a great question. What have we found? Because that has been a big line of our work, is just to figure out the most consistently effective approaches. But I just want to say that the reason attention is the focus of my work when it comes to mindfulness training is because attention is the focus of my work, not because it's the most important thing, and not even necessarily that we were chasing benefits only to attention. It's that those are the set of metrics I had the most expertise in. And so I knew that the consequences of these kind of certain circumstances that would drive down attention are very real pressure points for people. We had already confirmed that, where we'd look at people now instead of these laboratory settings, taking now a completely real world scenario that the group that we'd be working with would say, yeah, this is an intensive period of time over which I'm going to be feeling stress, negative mood, threat. Those are going to come up for me. But we as the researchers didn't have to contrive that. It's just part of the context in which the populations that we were working with would experience. So an example would be undergrads over the academic semester. By the end of the semester, most people report, yeah, that was pretty tough. And my daughter just came back from her semester, and I'm hearing it from her for sure. As faculty members, we know this. We don't feel great by the end of the semester. It's like it's kind of a depleting context. And or for example, military service members preparing for deployment, or fire season for firefighters, or athletes even just preparing for competition season. So there's so many examples where there's going to be a period of performance requirement, it's going to be ongoing, and it is described as like not feeling wonderful through it because the pressure is on. And when we just look at what attention does under those circumstances, with objective measures, brain metrics, etc., it is the case that subjective feeling people report of not quite feeling great by the end tracks with objective attention measures. So their attention is here. By the end of this academic semester, it's lower down. And so the question we were asking in our studies to get to your question about, what are the main components? The question we were asking isn't how to improve attention. It was actually, how do you just keep attention stable when the context of people's lives seems to be driving it down? And that was, in some sense, if you think about it as researchers, if you want to spend a lot of energy and the result of your energy is that nothing changes over time, most people would not jump up and down and say, hey, great, I did all this work, I did all this time providing an intervention and nothing changed. But in our case, because we knew what things look like if we do nothing, which is quite bad. I mean, whether it's an athlete now, depleted and now going into competition season, or worse, a military service member preparing for deployment, but now being in a war zone, depleted. These are bad things. So what we were interested in doing, is essentially start with what we know is effective as a validated gold standard protocol for offering mindfulness. And that, frankly, was very much tied to, the center that you direct, mindfulness-based stress reduction. When we started our work 20 years ago, even at that point, was the best gold standard program that was found to be beneficial in so many different domains. And the challenge point was, okay, we want to give something along those lines with those components and that kind of rigor of manualized delivery and high integrity trainers. But time was the pressure, because most of these individuals would say they do not have 8 weeks of time. They do not have 2.5 hours a week. They do not have 45 minutes a day. And the second pressure point was trainers. If it's a 2-year training protocol to become available to train, when we started this work, if you remember, at least with our military service member participants, we were in the middle of a war. I mean, many of these people were in their 4th, 5th deployment, and they needed help now. So those were the kind of two things that we were looking at. How can we make this feasible, and how can we make it scalable? And so the feasibility thing really focused in on how do we make things shorter? I mean, it was really that effective. So we kind of did a kind of a component analysis of like, okay, if we look at MBSR or other sort of MBIs, mindfulness-based interventions, what do they have? Well, they have time with a trainer, and that time is sort of filled with 2 broad categories. Things that are really around the practice, learning about what it is, doing the practice together, learning to do it, being guided to do it, discussing the practice. And then there's a lot of other content that is supportive of the general set of things that you might think about. What is stress reduction? What's stress physiology? Why is stress for the brain and bad for the brain and the body? So what I did in some of the initial studies is I said, let's take this sort of model. And with that point, we had delivered a 24-hour training, found that it was beneficial in service members. We were able to get that down to 16 hours over 8 weeks. Both of those were 8 weeks. I said, for the 16-hour version, let's try to parse this into two. Let's have one that's really practice focused. So it's just really around teach them what the practice is, have them discuss the practice, that's the focus. The other one is really more what I'd call, sort of didactic or content focused. They also did the exercises, and then we had two groups, put them head to head, meaning that the same trainer delivered both of those. And this was a very wonderful colleague, was deeply engaged in a mindfulness practitioner herself, and a military service member who was designing this stuff. And what we found was a very clear answer. It is all about practice. And only the practice focused program actually showed protection from that decline I was describing. The didactic focused program really didn't. It didn't look any different than giving no training at all. So we knew a couple of things from this project. We knew that we could go down to 8 hours of content delivered over, in that case, 4 to 8 weeks. And if we did that, probably we were going to have beneficial effects. The other thing we did is we looked to see how much people were actually practicing. Were they really doing 45 minutes or 30 minutes? And they weren't. The real answer was that they were doing about 12 minutes of practice on average when we started to see beneficial effects. The more they did beyond that, the more they benefited. So this sort of set in motion, a set of parameters around 4 weeks, around 8 hours, around 12 minutes as what we wanted to shoot for in terms of the training. The second piece of getting trainers, right, the scalability piece was not solved, because at that point, the person we'd been working with was the only trainer we had. And I had received another grant from the Department of Defense that was like, great, you found that mindfulness training is helpful. How are you going to help 1 million soldiers? How many trainers do you have? And I was like, one. So what we ended up doing is that we built sort of this, using those same parameters, a program from the ground up. And this was with my colleague, Scott Rogers at the University of Miami, that we ended up calling mindfulness-based attention training. And the key in the way we developed that program was that we wanted it to be able to be taught to people over a very short period of time. Now, a key part of that training is that they're going to have to practice themselves, but they did not need to be mindfulness experts. But they did need to learn how to specifically practice themselves and deliver the program. And what we found from that sort of process was that we could get folks that were novices learn first to kind of receive the program themselves and then learn to deliver it over a 10-week period of time. But it really mattered how much those trainers knew the context of the people they were delivering it to. So context familiar trainers were the ones, when we put it head to head, context familiar, unfamiliar trainers. In fact, what we did in one of our projects is we had performance psychologists, an Army performance psychologist, learn to deliver it over a 10-week practicum, learn to deliver this MBAT program. And a very seasoned MBSR teacher deliver it, who didn't really know anything about the military context. Wonderful teacher, very effective in the sort of typical civilian sense. And it was very clear that it was really those that knew about the context that produced benefits in the participants. So, and that's a very long answer, but to say that we now have a pretty strong sense that we can make training really anchored around the principles and methodology of MBSR that can be shorter and delivered by novices with benefits to attention that are protected.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's almost like seeing what the active elements are, very practice oriented, seeing the importance of folks who really understand the community they're serving, and to have them in the teaching role so that they're able to use the language and the examples and the relationships to be able to offer it in ways that really hit home. And
yeah, and it's been fun to be able to see all the different. A lot of different groups have asked for this training, and we've worked with a lot of different groups. So, in fact, one of the groups was at Brown, working with folks in the medical school to train medical school faculty to deliver it to medical students, or other projects where we've worked with different sports teams, et cetera. first responders, etc.
How do you, just thinking often people come to mindfulness, say, to reduce stress or to look at different, you know, health outcomes, maybe reduce feelings of anxiety or depression. Seems like a lot of the populations that you're working with aren't necessarily looking to reduce their stress, that they're looking to enhance their performance in their occupation. And so, what are some of the challenges of offering mindfulness training to folks that are not necessarily seeking stress reduction? Like, how do you frame the training? How do you engage with organizational partners to like increase accessibility and impacts of the program itself when people may not be first thinking of mindfulness to be able to enhance their performance in their occupation? And so, how do you engage with those communities to
Yeah, I mean,
support them?
um, it's very different than offering it at a public health clinic, right? I mean, it's not like it's not, people aren't coming to us in that way of like, well, just come to our program because you feel like a need. So it is a challenge because in many ways, and I think that's what one of the wonderful MBSR teacher that we work with said, like most people that would take courses with him wanted to be there. And in many ways, when you go into any organizational setting, you may not have people that want to be there in that same way, the personal motivation to drive. And I would say even the acknowledged suffering that says, I've got to do something different in the way I approach my life. In the same way I personally felt I had to, I just have to do something else. This isn't working. Many folks don't have that if you go into any organizational setting. And in particular, with the kinds of sort of tactical professionals and others that we work with, they would say things like, stress is like not an issue. I run into the burning building. Like, why are you talking to me about this? And that wasn't an issue for me specifically because what I knew is that kind of two things. I knew that no matter what they said, probably there was some suffering happening. And I didn't need to directly have it be acknowledged. What they would say for sure is that, yeah, I could definitely work on maximizing my attention. I want that. I want to be able to be fast, effective, discerning, helpful to my teammates. So there was an intrinsic desire for something that could advantage them and advantage their ability to do their job well and help their fellow team members do it well. That's sort of where we leaned in. Even with the sort of, we were asking about institutional partners, it all sort of evolved organically. I mean, you have to have those relationships, not only to be invited in to offer any kind of training, but to partner with those groups so that what is offered is relevant. I mean, so the challenge isn't simply it's feasible and scalable, it has to be relevant. And I mean in a granular way. So for every project we've worked on, any large scale project we've worked on, we've had an advisory board. In this sort of, now NIH has a word for it, community based participatory research, but that's been sort of our method all along. It's if I'm not a service member, I'm not a firefighter, I'm not a school teacher, I'm not an emergency services physician. So if I want to help those individuals, they have to show me what the pain points are, what the opportunities are, how what we're offering is relevant and in what ways. And that helps us language the programs. The same program, this same MBAT program, we would language differently based on who we're working with. So if it's a school teacher, it would be some module around watching for reactivity in our actions. Something like shout, don't shout, wanting to really ensure that. But for a soldier, maybe it's shoot, don't shoot. Or a police officer, maybe it's that. It's like don't have a reactive response. So we can language things in a way, or a physician prescribe, don't do the knee-jerk thing. Actually be considered. And just even this subtle languaging, even if the actual practices is the same and the methodology is the same, really does matter. And it would matter to any of us. I mean, we're going to always want to have something that hits the needs. So I would say it's not a challenge that we're not talking about stress. It's that whatever the need is where we want to meet people and, and authentically offer what these practices are in the context of that need.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I feel like it's where the mindfulness field is at in so many ways right now, is really deeply understanding the environments and lived experience of the folks that we're wanting to support and then meet them with programs that are really guided by who they are and how they are and what would best serve them through the mindfulness lens. And I appreciate you doing
Right.
the work, and might even bring some questions in that were submitted uh, beforehand. One was from someone who shared, how can first responders and corrections professionals become more aware of when they're stuck in the hypervigilant stress response, especially after the need to respond have subsided. And so there can be times maybe when we're in like a very much into attention space that might even lead to some hypervigilance. And how do we actually maybe turn that off after the event has taken place?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, any of these solutions are not sort of a one and done, right? This is not a hack. This is not like, oh, I'm going to tell you this and then you're going to be fine. It really is, in the broader sense, transforming the way that the brain and as a system operates. And that's going to take time. In the same way, transforming the body is going to take regular exercise, right? It's not a,
Mm.
there's no easy way to get there. But some of the things that happen through the course of taking our 4-week program, for example, is that people start tuning in to where in time their attention is. So is my attention replaying something that's already happened or sort of previewing an imagined event? And when they kind of check into what is happening in my mind with regard to the moment, that helps. And if they notice that there's a sort of a hijack to the past or the future, then using some anchors, even in the moment when they might recognize that are happening right now. So that's where the breath, focusing on the breath is happening right now, or the body, certain body sensations are helpful. That would be a way in which to understand that there's sort of a lingering effect of an acute event that's occurred, or of replaying. In some cases, that can happen as well with very, very difficult events. And the point is not, it's not a joyous reflection of something that's happened. It's typically a hijacking of your whole system, mind, body, etc., that is causing problems with what you're trying to do in the moment, whether that's have a conversation with your partner or actually do another task that's required in that moment.
Mm.
So there's lots of different things like that, but the noticing aspect takes some time to develop, and that's why, and that's what we say. It's the reps that you're doing quietly by yourself for that 12 to 15 minutes a day is allowing you to have better access to tuning into what's going on right now.
Mm.
It doesn't mean that you're in the moment, but you're tuning into what's happening in this moment, which may mean that the mind is actually displaced in time.
Yeah, I think about John Kabat-Zinn has talked about, if we're going to jump out of a plane, we want to make sure that we've sewn our parachute before we jump out so that we can use it rather than trying to sew our parachute while we're like going through the air. And so this idea of doing those practices at home that help with like the self-awareness as well as the attention control so that we can notice maybe if our mind is getting hijacked, but we also have the ability to redeploy our attention to an area that's more productive or more helpful in that moment. That training really comes in those times that we need it. Yeah,
Absolutely.
appreciate that. Another person submitted a question around uh, being like a service member who's transitioned into civilian life, sharing that that's not so simple. And how could mindfulness better help adapt to that transition to civilian life, and how soon should it be implemented in the transition process? For example, how could it help with adapting to civilian work environments and helping with regulating emotions in civilian life? I think she shared, it's like military, it's often the way communication happens and emotions are shared can be different than what expectations are in civilian life. And so, how could mindfulness help with that transition over?
Oh yeah. I mean, but I think that asking the question is a great place to start. It's like, oh, I might need some support in being able to do this.
Mm-hmm.
Our conversations with our military colleagues has been, this should be a through line through the sort of life cycle, the military life cycle. And we frankly have done work on the front end of it and even the leadership end. And it's my wish that we can actually help people in this transition period. as well. We just haven't formally worked with them, but thankfully there are plenty of groups that that are available sort of in the civilian world, including the Center for Mindfulness to do that. I think it would be helpful to have shared community around that experience. So, when we offer it in basic combat training, for example, they're all experiencing the same thing. So when we offer practices, they can even informally talk to each other about it. When we offer it to one-star generals in the Army, they're experiencing the same thing. They may not actually talk to each other about it, but there is a sense of shared community. And so I agree with this person that there are ways in which sharing the experience of this transition time that can be fraught with many things. I mean, I think what was described as just the challenges of what it means to be in a new work environment. I've had folks that have retired from the military join my lab and talk about that often of like, yeah, it's different. It's different. It's not, you're allowed to knock on my door if your schedule changes. It's a totally different environment. But it's an adjustment like any other adjustment throughout life, right? So going from your first duty station to your second duty station was an adjustment. Going from being deployed to being home is an adjustment. And so, in some sense, these are general principles that mindfulness can definitely help with in the same way we talked about. Noticing that there is a preoccupation, that there's an expectation, that there may be a hijacking of the mind and accompanying negative emotions, and then working with that in a way that's supportive. Allowing yourself to, both have the grace and self-supported friendliness to know this is sort of part of the process, and also that there are tools that you can implement. There are practices that you can do daily to formally establish more access to mindfulness, but also informal practices that in the moment you can be reminded of that can help you, essentially support yourself through some of the challenges that come up. But for sure, I just want to say that for this person, reach out to me because we are getting more and more requests like that, and we would love to do a project where we're actually supporting people transitioning
Yeah,
from
great.
active duty to retired life. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm been thinking of all your work in folks with high consequence roles, but I also know the work that you've done in the families of those professionals as well, such as with military families, and be curious to hear a little more about the work that you've done with the family members of service members and what you found has been supportive for them.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I just want to say that even though we've been talking about as high consequence jobs, et cetera, I mean, for all of us, what we do is high consequence. It's our life.
Yeah.
And these kind of periods of time where there's high demand, all of us are going to experience that, whether we know it's coming or not, right? So for many of these groups, they know, they see it. You know, Others of us, we may end up in a high demand situation, whether it's a health challenge for ourselves or a family member or caregiving responsibilities. So I think that what we're talking about here applies more broadly to the human experience. And when it comes to military service members, I mean, the their spouses. What we know is that the psychological well-being of the dyad of the spouses, one who's active duty and one who's not, is very well matched. So if one person's suffering, just like in any relationship, the other one is. And what ended up happening, the thing that got me to want, I mean, I had wanted to do this for a long time, just because seeing what it would be like to have a member of your family, whether it's as a spouse or as a parent, be in this situation where they're going to be deployed, especially when we're having our active deployments. It was like it felt like there's got to be something we can do to support. But what happened was that one of our projects, we were going to this military base to do data collection after the training was over, and my team was there. They were in the room getting the data collected with our computers, et cetera. And I was sort of sitting outside. And almost one by one, as service members were coming out, they'd be, thank you for this opportunity. Get this to my spouse. You get this to my spouse. Sort of like a request or demand, and then engaging with them a little bit. It was like, look, when I'm deployed, I'm busy. I know what I'm doing. I know I'm safe or I'm in the middle of it. My spouse doesn't know what's happening often. And while I'm deployed, all of the management of everything in our lives, our children, our family, is on that person. And so if there's anything you can do to support, please do. And, I tried actually going to the DOD initially, just saying, hey, can we apply for a grant to support service members, military spouses? And it was kind of like, no, we're not going to pay for that right now. And it was actually through philanthropy and some small grants that we did our first pilot project, in which we saw beneficial effects for spouses that allowed me to have pilot data. Then I went back to the Department of Defense and was able to get a much larger project. And what I knew when we got to that point where we were going to do this larger project is I didn't want to have us be the outsiders that were going to do something. We needed them to be able to have a voice and participate fully. So we ended up doing a train the trainer project, where this time we knew that if it's spouses training other spouses, they definitely know the context much more deeply than we ever could. And getting the community and kind of ethos of supporting each other such a strong part that it was sort of a natural way to grow that community of support. And these folks were not, these participants were not professional trainers. So they were a little hesitant on some parts of it. There's some parts of our program where we talk about the science. They didn't feel comfortable doing that. I'm like, press a recording. Or there were some that really wanted more support and even learning how to deliver a practice. We helped them through that as well. So what ended up happening is that we had a train the trainer project in which spouses trained other spouses, and we evaluated the impact of that training and found that very similar to their active duty spouse, their attention benefited, and there was a dose response effect. So similarly, the more they practiced, the more they benefited. Their mood was protected instead of getting worse over time. And their psychological health improved. There were reductions in depression. So this to me was just a very, very exciting thing to say we can help. And, part of the other motivation was that the spouse is, especially in the context of a family, if a parent is stressed and checked out, the ripple effects on the entire family unit are tremendous. So if we can support the spouse, we're supporting the family. And this is an area that I deeply want to grow, not only in the context of service members, but in other communities. And we're seeing the same exact kind of comments from a project we're doing right now at the LA County Fire Department. They're like, my spouse, can you get this to my spouse? And it was very sweet. I talked to one of the fire chiefs, and said he was on vacation, and we're in the middle of our project right now. So he was doing just playing the recording and doing the practices, sitting on a beach in Hawaii. And he decided that he was going to offer his wife if she wanted to sit beside him and practice. And for that entire period of their vacation, they practiced together. Nice. And to me, that just meant a lot. That meant that there's an organic outflowing of benefit in both directions, of spouses helping each other. And then when the journey is tough, that's a very important thing to do.
Yeah, I think that's a really important area around just like the community side of mindfulness training and supporting it in relationships and families. Like Linda Carlson, who I think you know at University of Calgary, developed the mindfulness-based cancer recovery program, and so she allows one friend or loved one to join the program with the person who's going through cancer treatment. And so not only the individual that's getting the treatment is getting the mindfulness training, but also one of their caregivers. And how does that help the support not only of the person going through the cancer treatment, but she's also looked at the health outcomes in the caregiver and found reductions in stress and improvements in well-being for them too. So I think it's just a wonderful direction that research is going in, and I'm glad that you're leading the way on that too. I know we're coming up to time, and we've got lots of really great questions. Maybe I'll just ask one more from the audience. One shared, your discussion around depletion feels very resonant, especially with the year wrapping up and many of us gearing up for some much needed time off. What would be your recommendation for approaching time off so that energy could be restored and attention acuity maintained?
Yeah. Not probably all that different than what I've been saying so far is going to be the key. I think, though, what I like about this question is acknowledging the kind of impact and continuity of demand. And it might, it's like, when we're in it, it's almost like we might not even notice it as much. But paying attention to that feeling of fatigue, of needing something to uh, kind of renew our buoyancy and our return. And if we don't do that, we know what happens next. When people experience that critical point of there's depletion happening here, I'm feeling it, and you ignore it or push past that, then we're in burnout territory, which is much more consequential, not only for undoing that negative impact on our psychological well-being and our effectiveness in what we're trying to do. So it's best to catch it soon, and it's never too early to start, is the other way to say it.
Mm.
And so if the question really is around practically how to start, it kind of depends on where you're at. If you've got a mindfulness practice and you've not been able to practice as much during the busy season, now's a wonderful time. Get up a little bit early, practice before your day starts, even though it's the holiday. If you're brand new and you've never done it before, it's a great time to start. And start with kindness and ease and make it a lift that is accessible. In the same way, if you were going to decide to start a fitness habit, you wouldn't just immediately day one start lifting, 200 pounds. Start with a light lift, 3 minutes a day. See how that goes. Get the win when you do it and grow from there. So I love this energy behind it. And I would say absolutely, this is a great time. And recharging in this sense just means reinvesting some of your time to pay attention to your attention. And there are plenty of resources to be able to do that.
Yeah, yeah, I appreciate that. This speaker series, we're opening and closing with the same two questions. And so, the closing question that we've been offering is, looking ahead to the future, where do you see the study and practice of mindfulness best serving humanity?
Yeah. Um, I think of it as a force multiplier for all that we can do. That's why I love the way Fran started us off. It's a force multiplier for all that we can do in the service of each other and our planet. And the critical moments now are how to have it not be siloed as something people do only when they need it or only because it is they decide to sign up for a research study or something like that. How do we our challenge is, how do we make this normative in the same way that going for a jog or going to the gym every day is completely normalized? How do we, and this is what we're working toward, at least that I feel like, our community of contemplative scientists are really promoting, that our own flourishing, our own buoyancy, our own life force requires us to exercise the mind. And exercising the mind is not a mystery anymore. It really hasn't been a mystery for probably many thousands of years, but we now have formalized how to do this with science-based, science-backed approaches, and we know what to do. So in the same way that we know that there's a challenge with exercise, even knowing it isn't enough. You've got to have support structures in place. And, I'm talking to somebody who's expert in public health. This is a non-critical juncture of, first of all, think of mindfulness as a daily way to train and exercise your mind for your own health in the same way you do your body. And then let's sort out how to ensure that you have the habit of doing it, because just knowing it is not enough. And I do think that's where we're at right now. We're at the point where, in one sense, we're going to continue learning about the specific mechanisms of action, the detailed ways in which mindfulness has these transformative effects. But the other big part, I think, at least from the public health and prevention side, is how do we solve the problem of making this integrated and normalized so that people have access to it and a willingness and ease to incorporate it in.
Mm.
And I think those are not easy problems, but they're problems that we're going to have to tackle with the same sort of excitement that we are at seeing brain changes when people meditate. I mean, you have to have that sense of, like, it has to be meaningful. Seeing the brain changes aren't going to make you actually able to benefit from it. You've got to do it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's great. Great answer. I think, when I read books, one of my senses of like whether it's a meaningful book for me or not is when it shows up in the rest of my day or the rest of my week. And I'm reading your book right now and finding that my attention is enhanced. That you have created some very clean ways to describe how to direct attention, how to train it, and how to foster it throughout the day that I think is really meaningful. And so just want to thank you for the work that you do,
Oh,
that you're not only going deeply into what it takes to foster attention in times when we really need it, and in times when it's just nice to have and promotes joy and happiness, but you're also really skillfully translating it into ways that broad swaths of society can understand. So thank you for the work that you do. I look forward to checking out your app when it comes out in January. And any last words that you want to share with the audience before we sign off?
I just want to thank you. I want to thank you for this entire series. And I love the community that's here. So I want to thank them. I think that thinking of mindfulness as a very important um, practice is important, and really appreciating its evolution is not going to happen without our concerted effort and our attention. So thanks for everybody that was part of this conversation.
Yeah, great. Wonderful. Good. Yeah. Fran, anything else you want to add as we close this session?
Yeah, I really enjoyed the talk today, and judging by the comments and questions that came through, it had a high impact on the individuals here. And yeah, thank you everyone for joining. I see that people were making connections, and really there was a lot of energy around next steps. And so thank you for that inspiration, Amishi. I just want to let everyone know that again, this session was recorded, and we'll send out an email with a link to that. But also that the speaker series is going to continue on into the new year. So it's not up on our event site yet, but we do want to let you know our next talk will be on Tuesday, January 13th. We'll be joined by Dr. Zev Schumann Olivier, a Harvard Medical School psychiatrist and a director of the Center for Mindfulness and Compassion at Cambridge Health Alliance. So the conversation that Eric and Zev will be having will be around interoception, which is our ability to kind of sense what's happening inside of our bodies and how that inner awareness can open up new paths for healing, especially in clinical and healthcare settings. So it's going to be a rich way to start the new year. So do invite you to join us. Eric and I will also be giving a talk next week. I put a link to that as well, around Eric's book that's coming out and the mindfulness-based blood pressure program that we have running here as well. So that's it on my end. Thank you both so much, Amishi and Eric, and everyone online. Take care, be well, happy holidays, and thank you for being with us today.